Welcome to the 9th and final installment in my 9-day bike trip series, where I'm exploring central and eastern Ontario from the seat of my bicycle. In this segment I'll be riding from Emily Provincial Park to the town of Aurora. My route will begin in the west direction, then I'll be zigzagging south to pass below Lake Scugog. The community of Port Perry will be my approximate halfway point, then I'll continue west until I reach Aurora, where I'll be able to put my bike on a GO train, which can take me back to my home city, Toronto. So today is Sunday, May 26, 2019, and I woke up this morning at 6:30 a.m. As I had kind of been expecting, unfortunately the stuff that I hung to dry on the clothesline last night was still quite damp. I really don't want to spend the day sitting on a wet seat cushion, so I decided to make use of the clothes dryer in the park's laundry room before leaving. By 8 a.m. I had everything packed up and made my way out of the park. I headed north, then went west where I crossed a bridge over the Pigeon River. So far we've got nice blue skies with a few light clouds. The current temperature is 17 degrees Celsius and there's no rain in the forecast, but there's expected to be a moderate wind from the northwest today. So far the roads this morning are very quiet and peaceful. In fact, this road I'm riding on right now is part of a City of Kawartha Lake signed bike route. The road curves briefly to the south, but then continues west. I'm now approaching a small community called Peterborough, which was first settled in the early 1800s and was named after an early settler named Thomas Ree. Traveling by horse and buggy, these appear to be some plain-dressed Mennonites who are perhaps on their way to church on this Sunday morning. I hadn't really been expecting to see Mennonites on this trip, but if you refer to my 8th video from my Ontario Bike Tour number 2 from last year, you'll see I encountered many of them on that day. After a short stretch riding along Highway 7, I'm now on a nice quiet road once again. This big yellow field looks like it might be growing canola, but the yellow flowers are honestly just dandelions. To help me pass the time on the road this morning, I took out my portable AM/FM radio. I managed to tune in a local radio station based in the community of Lindsay, which is called Bob FM. The route I'll be following for the next several kilometers will be zigzagging back and forth between the west and south directions. The water body on my right is the Scugog River, which opens up southwest of here and becomes Lake Scugog. The reason for all the zigzagging this morning is that Lake Scugog forms quite a large obstacle between here and my final destination, so I need to work my way down to its southern edge to get past it. If you were in a boat traveling north along the Scugog River from here, you'd eventually reach the community of Lindsay where there's a lock, and you'd ultimately be able to continue to Sturgeon Lake, and from there be able to access all the other destinations within the Trent-Severn Waterway. When I made a quick stop to stretch my muscles, I saw a group of road cyclists ride past me. This is a sign that I typically associate with the final day of a bike trip because it means that I must be getting closer to the suburbs. The water peeking through between these lakefront homes is Lake Scugog. When I made my last stop, I also took the opportunity to reapply some sunscreen, and you may notice that I didn't do the greatest job getting even coverage on my face. The time is now 10 o'clock and I've ridden 32 kilometers so far this morning. After starting the day in the city of Kawartha Lakes, I've now entered the township of Scugog, which is part of the regional municipality of Durham. I've been starting to notice that my chain on my bike has been squeaking a bit, so I pulled over to reapply some chain lube. My bike got quite wet yesterday in the rain, so I was kind of expecting this might need to happen. Coming down this hill I could see some wind turbines in the distance. I believe they're the first turbines I've seen since my last look at Wolf Island back on day 4 of this trip. When I saw the forecast was predicting wind from the northwest, I had been expecting it would slow me down quite a bit, but it actually seems to be mostly coming from the north, and I'm actually making really good time this morning. This small community I'm passing through is called Caesarea. I actually missed one of my turns and hadn't been anticipating coming exactly this way, but it really didn't make much of a difference. Eventually this road terminates and merges with Highway 7A. This is a really busy road with no paved shoulder, which makes it really horrible for riding on. At the southern tips of Lake Scugog there's a lot of marshlands, and unfortunately this is the only road which passes through it. Thankfully I'm only on here for about 10 kilometers, and hopefully the time will pass by quickly. Lake Scugog is an artificially flooded lake created when a dam was built in the community of Lindsay to power a grist mill in 1834. After the dam was finished, the water level in the lake increased by 10 feet, and the stagnant water caused an outbreak of deadly fevers to the surrounding farms. In 1838, the angry local residents rose up with axes, flintlocks, and pitchforks and traveled to Lindsay and tore the dam down. Eventually a settlement was reached, and the dam was permitted to be rebuilt at a lower height, which is more in line with the natural maximum water level of the lake. In its current configuration, Lake Scugog is quite shallow, with an average depth of only about 1.4 meters. At the southwest corner of the lake is the community of Port Perry, where I've now arrived. Having now covered 57 kilometers, Port Perry is where I'm planning on stopping for lunch. I actually had plans to meet up with some of my family members here for lunch, but since the effect from the wind this morning was much less than I was anticipating, I'm about an hour ahead of schedule. So I gave them a heads up that I'm early, but while I wait for them to arrive, I'll take this opportunity to explore around Port Perry. The first settlement in Port Perry was established in 1821, and the community is named after Peter Perry, who laid out the original village lots on the lake in 1848. With access from the lake to the Trent Severn Waterway, and later access by train to Port Whitby, Port Perry became quite a transportation hub and grew quickly. The community has a current population of just less than 10,000. Coming up on the right, this big brown building built in 1874 is the Port Perry Granary, which is Canada's oldest grain elevator. I'm glad I had the opportunity to explore around Port Perry while I was waiting for my family. At about noon, I headed down to our lunchtime meeting spot, which is a restaurant called Sweet Maple. Meeting me here for lunch is my mom, dad, and sister, all of whom live within about 25 minutes of Port Perry. It was really great getting to visit with them, and I enjoyed some delicious Eggs Benedict for lunch. My parents brought their bikes with them to Port Perry, so after our meal they joined me for a segment of the continuation of my ride heading west. After getting out of Port Perry and off of Highway 7A, we ended up on a beautifully quiet country road that had just been freshly paved and even had a bike lane. My parents are avid cyclists and have spent their early retirement years riding in dozens of countries all around the world. When I was growing up, we did bike trips as a family, of which I credit as my biggest source of inspiration for the tours that I do today as an adult. As you can see, there are lots more dandelions growing here too. Over on the right, this large building is the Greenwood Mushroom Farm. After 9 days of riding on the road by myself, it was really nice having other people to talk to while riding, and of course I had so many stories to tell from my travels. After crossing Marsh Hill Road, Scugog Line 6 turns to gravel, but at least it's relatively smooth. This area has some nice rolling hills, but they're much less significant than the ones I experienced earlier in my trip. My mom spotted this interesting tree which is covered in shoes. So the three of us rode together for about 14 kilometers, then we said our goodbyes and my parents returned back to Port Perry. It was great riding with them, and I've been so lucky getting to visit with different members of my family along the way on this trip. After a short segment north, I'm now heading west again. The time is now about 2 p.m. and I've ridden 75 kilometers so far today. I'm now riding within the township of Uxbridge, which is still part of Durham Region. The community of Uxbridge is further north of me, and I won't be passing through it today. This area seems to have a lot of forests, and there isn't as much farmland. The temperature is now increased above 18 degrees Celsius, and it's truly beautiful weather for riding. On both the left and right of me, I can see some big gravel pits. This area has quite a few more hills than I've been expecting. I took my portable radio out again to see what I could find on the dial. This road I'm approaching here is the boundary between Durham Region and York Region. The small lake over on my left is called Island Lake. After turning off the boundary road, I've now entered the town of Whitchurch-Stouffville, which is part of the regional municipality of York. Previously with my new radio, I hadn't had very much success with tuning in AM radio stations, but this afternoon I've been able to find the Blue Jays baseball game, which is a nice change of pace to listen to. Riding along this path, I had a race with a squirrel. This road I'm riding on is part of the Greenbelt route, which is a 475 kilometer signed cycling route stretching from Northumberland County to Niagara. The route I took from Port Hope to Coburg back on day one of this trip was also part of that same route. The road where I entered York Region is called Aurora Road, and if I stayed on it, it would have taken me directly to the Aurora GO station. However, as it continues further west, it becomes a pretty busy road, so I elected to venture further south to ride along some quieter roads. The time is now 3:30, and I've ridden 97 kilometers so far today. Eventually the quiet road I was on terminated, and I headed further south to continue west along Vandorf Side Road. Vandorf Side Road is in really rough shape, and somehow York Region feels that putting up this sign is a solution to the problem. When I'm planning out my routes ahead of time, I spend quite a bit of time using Google Street View to evaluate the surface condition and traffic volume of the roads I'm choosing between. Often the Street View images are quite a few years old, and when I see a road that's in really bad condition, I optimistically assume that it's been repaved since the images were taken. In this case, my assumption was definitely wrong. This interesting looking old bridge up ahead is for a branch of the CN rail line. I'm now crossing over Highway 404, which is the northern extension of Toronto's Don Valley Parkway. In the distance I could spot the Aurora Water Tower, which must mean I'm getting close to my destination. Despite being really close to the edge of the suburbs, the scenery here is still very agricultural, and this road is still very nice and quiet. Despite the rough pavement earlier, I'm really glad I decided to take this route rather than staying on Aurora Road. When I reached Bayview Avenue, the suburban houses came into view and I headed north towards the train station. The end of a bike trip is always kind of bittersweet. There's a slight sense of sadness that the vacation is coming to an end, but it's overpowered by a strong sense of accomplishment. Another emotion I'm feeling is a great sense of relief, since I can now stop worrying that my bike or my body might break down in a way that can't be easily repaired. The time is now 4:10, and here I've arrived at the Aurora GO station. This train station first opened in 1853, and the journey from Toronto to here was the route of the first ever steam train voyage in Canada West. This train station is also the point where I began my Ontario bike tour number 2 last summer. There's GO train service from here to Toronto's Union Station, which now operates every hour on weekends. After the train arrived, I loaded my bike on and began my journey back to Toronto. Of course, it would have been possible for me to have ridden my bike all the way back home without taking the train, but I really don't enjoy riding my bike in the suburbs nearly as much as I enjoy riding it in the country. On a vacation like this, when I have a limited number of days to travel, being able to take my bike on the train allows me to maximize the type of riding I enjoy most. The train ride from Aurora to Toronto takes a little less than an hour and costs $8.54 with a Presto card. This is my first time coming into Toronto along this train line in quite a few years, and I spotted quite a few familiar landmarks. I arrived at Union Station at about 6 p.m. and pushed my bike along the platform and through the concourse. To celebrate the successful completion of my trip, I enjoyed a McCafe Oreo Frappe. Between the big tall buildings, I followed a familiar route home towards my apartment in the annex. After 9 days of riding on mostly quiet country roads, it feels quite different riding in the city again. Once I completed my final 4 kilometers of riding, I arrived back home safe and sound. So including my exploration of Port Perry and my ride through the streets of Toronto, I rode my bike a total of 115 kilometers today. When I tally up my distances from each day in the trip, I get a total of 871 kilometers. In terms of distance, this trip wasn't quite as far as either of the 2 bike trips I did last summer. However, in terms of hill climbing, my total is 5,210 meters of elevation gains, which is by far my all-time high. Throughout the course of the trip, I spent a total of about $660, which is not bad for a 9-day vacation. My largest expense was campsite permits, followed by meals at restaurants and grocery items. I also spent money on supplies for repairing my bike and purchased a new AM/FM radio. GO train fares were my smallest expense. Over the last 9 days, I truly had a blast on this bike tour. The trip was filled with a great variety of different types of scenery and tons of new territory I'd never seen before. It was also really nice getting to visit with family along the way, and the weather was very cooperative for me. If you've enjoyed following along with this video series, I strongly encourage you to get out and do a bike tour of your own. You'd probably be surprised by how much interesting territory there is to explore within a short distance of where you live. If you haven't already watched them, I'd strongly recommend checking out the other 2 sets of bike tour videos that I posted last year. So I hope you've enjoyed joining me for this final episode in the series. If you've watched all 9 episodes, I'd love to hear from you. So please leave a comment below and tell me what you enjoyed most about the series, and as always, thanks for watching.